Hi, this is Jacqueline Lukeman with the Real News Network. This week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced that he will convene a commission to, quote, provide advice, end quote, to the State Department on human rights as they relate to U.S. foreign policy.
I'm pleased to announce today the formation of a commission on unalienable rights. The commission is composed of human rights experts, philosophers, and activists, Republicans, Democrats, and independents of varied backgrounds and beliefs, who will provide me with advice on human rights grounded in our nation's founding principles and the principles of 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
But the Secretary of State's own words and the makeup of the commission itself are raising concerns for human rights advocates about the true intent of this commission. Here to discuss this today is Reverend Graylin Hagler. Reverend Hagler is the senior minister at Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ in Washington, D.C. He's also the executive director of Faith Strategies, a faith-based organization working to promote human, civil, and workers' rights throughout society and in the public discourse. Thank you so much for joining me today, Reverend Hagler.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for having me here.
So there's a particular faith narrative that surrounds this discussion about this commission, and I appreciate you coming on to help parse that out for us today.
Well, thanks for allowing me to be here to talk about this subject.
So let's start with what Mike Pompeo said in his announcement. When he announced the formation of this commission, he said it's to address confusion among nations about what human rights are. And this is what he said. As human rights claims have proliferated, some claims have come into tension with one another, provoking questions and clashes about which rights are entitled to gain respect. He then said nation states and international institutions remain confused about their respective responsibilities concerning human rights. Is Mike Pompeo right? Is there confusion among the world leaders about what human rights are?
There's not confusion among the people in terms of what human rights are. And obviously, this is an attempt to try to muddy the water, to get another discussion going on, to allow, in a sense, totalitarianism and fascism to have its reign and be free of any kind of moral or ethical standard. And so it's an attempt to try to rewrite that. We know that, for example, people have a right to the basic necessities of life: water, clean air, security, a place to feel and be able to raise their family. Health care, that's what they don't want to talk about, is whether health care is a privilege, is a commodity, or is it a right? I mean, all those types of things. In a sense, they're trying to redefine it so that basically the U.S. and other empire states can go forth and do its dirty business without having any questions raised or being held up against any kind of moral and ethical barometer.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned specifically the United States and the allies of the United States directing the narrative here, because it's the language of the announcement of this commission that raised concerns for people. And it actually happened back in May, because the notice for the commission was published in the Federal Register earlier this year. People were concerned, particularly about one segment of the notice that reads that the commission would provide, quote, fresh thinking about human rights discourse, where such discourse has departed from our nation's founding principles of natural law and natural rights, end quote. This, like you said, seems like a centering of the founding principles of the United States in particular in relation to global human rights and its implications. Why is that concerning, especially from a faith and justice perspective?
Well, it's concerning because basically there has been an attempt in the United States to try to take right-wing religious values and make them part of the political ethos of the nation. And that has been continuing to be pushed and continuing to be brought forth into the public square and into the public arena, where folks want to control everything about life, whether you're LGBTQIA, whether you are basically the disabled, whether you are Black folks, whether you are Latino folks, and basically to say, hold it, all these things that you've been talking about in terms of human rights and civil rights is really not a right that should be afforded you, because the only right that should be afforded you is the basic right of survival of the fittest, I might add. So in a sense, all of this definition and redefinition is to attempt to try to throw away all of the advances that have been made over the last 50 years, 60 years, in terms of people actively being able to talk about the sovereignty of their own being and the security of their own communities and own families, that type of thing. And so basically it's an attempt to try to water all that down and to go back to the past.
And you mentioned the advancement in the discussion of human rights in the past 50 years, because Pompeo seemed to quite strategically mention the universal human rights document that was championed and contributed to significantly by Eleanor Roosevelt in 1948. But in his comments, he mentions natural law and natural rights. And so what's the historical context and contradiction of him mentioning the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its importance, but also his mentioning natural law and natural rights?
Well, the natural law and the natural rights. I mean, just first of all, let's take a look at the term, Jacqueline. When you start talking about natural laws and natural rights, who defines what is natural? And basically in the system that they want to kind of reconstruct, it's a system of weak versus strong, of rich versus poor, of white versus people of color. That's the natural order of things that they keep talking about or keep making allusions to. The right to colonialize other countries and other people, because you got the military right to do so. And therefore, they have the ability to define, according to your perspective, what is natural and what is unnatural. Or the advances that have been made in terms of gender identity to make a definition of what is natural and what is unnatural. Again, it's all of this wordplay that we should be very, very suspicious of, because really what this is an attempt is to try to take the entire world back to a place that existed 50, 60 years ago.
Mm. Now, having said that, I'm glad you said that, because that, I think, sets up the opportunity for us to examine who is on this commission and why these concerns are being raised about what this commission is really doing. So the commission will be chaired by someone named Marianne Glendon. She's a professor at Harvard, a former United States ambassador to the Vatican. She's known for her vocal opposition to same-sex marriage.
And I'm sure abortion.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we also have another member of the commission, Peter Berkowitz of the Hoover Institution. He has argued that human rights are, in essence, religious rights, and that the source of all human rights is Christianity. A third member of the commission is Paolo Carrozza, a professor at the Notre Dame Law School. He served the Vatican in various capacities and is a member of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. So there are several other members of this commission who have clear ties to not just the Christian faith, but a particular narrative of, or a particular dogma of the Christian faith, which is the conservative Christian perspective. Now, not every member of the commission is associated or affiliated with this particular ideology, which is specifically prominent in the United States, but most are. So when we take into context, Reverend Hagler, this administration's actions and the particular faith perspective that this administration is supposedly representing, the conservative Christian, politically conservative, right-wing Republican, very white supremacist perspective, and you look at who is on this commission, what conclusions could you possibly draw as to what this commission is really trying to do?
Well, I mean, obviously, in terms of the whole Catholic perspective, it comes down to pro-life. And to basically say that the fetus is not being protected and his unalienable rights are being violated. That's one perspective. But also, when you begin to really look at it, it's just like Pompeo the other day was before the Christians United for Israel with John Hagee, bragging about what they've done for Israel, and they're ignoring totally all of the human rights violations that have taken place in the occupied territories and in Gaza. And so it's this administration that can continue to play footsie with North Korea. It's this administration that can continue to play footsie with Russia, and at the same time try to oppress and suppress regimes that have made great strides towards education and towards being able to engage its population in a positive way, such as what has gone on in Cuba for years. Again, to turning back the clock. And so one of the things is that you can't trust this administration on its word on anything. They love to play word games. They love to paint a picture that keeps folks guessing and keeps folks arguing and creates distraction while they push forth an agenda. And this agenda that they're pushing forth in terms of re-examining the unalienable rights and to try to more clearly define this is to make sure that people like me and you, our voices are not included and our demands for justice are not.
So from the perspective of a member of the faith community and an activist also, what role do people in the faith community have in engaging this commission and in challenging these potential policies that could affect so many millions of people?
Sure. And I think that what we got to do, because the commission is going to do what it's designed to do. It's their ball game. It's their playing field. What we have to do is to continue to educate our people, our communities, about the things that should be expected, the things that should be required, the things that are needed, what it means to protect and stand up for your rights and how to push for your rights continually. Because, all the rights that we've pushed for came out of really a repressive and oppressive society. And we had to push against it. And so we're pushing against it still. And we got to remember that the struggle is not over, but the struggle is upon us, and it's something that we got to continue to push for and make sure that people are protected and the rights and dignity of every human being is upheld.
We will certainly continue to watch Mike Pompeo and this administration and this commission in what it will eventually do. But right now, we have to leave this issue right here. But thank you, Reverend Hagler, for coming on today and helping us to understand what's really going on here.
Thank you, Jacqueline Lukman.
And thank you for watching. This is Jacqueline Lukman with the Real News Network in Baltimore.